In the quiet town of Oak Ridge, where the days moved slowly and the people trusted each other without question, life appeared perfect on the surface. Rows of neatly trimmed hedges, children riding their bikes on sunlit streets, and the friendly wave of neighbors passing by painted a picture of harmony. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors during the day and where crime was something you only saw on the news from faraway cities. But behind one of those spotless white fences on Willow Lane, something terrible was happening. Something no one had imagined possible. Ava Thompson was just 4 years old, a delicate little girl with curly blonde hair and soft blue eyes. People remembered her smile, the way she used to wave at the mailman, or how she clung shyly to her mother at the grocery store. She lived in a small, cozy house with her mother, Stephanie Thompson, and Stephanie's boyfriend, Derek Miller. To everyone who knew them, they looked like a normal family. Stephanie had moved to Oak Ridge about 2 years earlier, seeking a fresh start after a rough breakup. She met Derek soon after, and within months, he had moved in. Derek didn't talk much to the neighbors. He kept to himself, always wearing a hard stare and rarely smiling. While Stephanie was friendly and warm at first, her personality slowly began to change. She stopped chatting with the other moms at the park. She missed school meetings. When asked about Ava, her answers became shorter, more guarded. Some people noticed Ava was showing up less and less. At first, it didn't raise many alarms. Children get sick, families go on trips, life gets busy. But Ava was different. She disappeared from view almost entirely. There were a few unsettling signs. One neighbor recalled seeing Ava in the backyard. Months earlier, sitting alone, motionless, staring at the ground. Another said they thought they heard crying one night, but it stopped quickly. There were whispers, uneasy feelings, but no one wanted to interfere. Oak Ridge was the kind of place where privacy was sacred, where families were trusted to care for their own. So, everyone stayed quiet. Behind the walls of that ordinary house, Ava was living a silent nightmare. Though no one could see it, her world was filled with fear, pain, and confusion. The warmth that should have come from family had been replaced with cold silence and terrifying punishments. No one knocked on the door to ask if she was okay. No teacher raised a red flag. No friend questioned Stephanie hard enough to make her crack. Ava's suffering went unnoticed, not because no one cared, but because they couldn't believe such a thing could happen in their town. The same fence that marked property boundaries also kept the truth hidden. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Ava's light dimmed behind those walls. The town of Oak Ridge continued on, peaceful and unaware, while just one house away, a child was being broken, piece by piece. Ava's life behind closed doors was a silent, ongoing horror that unfolded inch by inch, day by day, for 18 long months. What had started as a new beginning for Stephanie and her daughter soon turned into a living nightmare after Derek Miller entered their lives. At first, Derek seemed like a steady figure, quiet, firm, and dependable. But over time, his dark temper began to show. He controlled Stephanie's every move, monitoring her calls, dictating where she could go, and even managing her finances. She became isolated, dependent, and numb. And at the center of it all, Ava suffered the most. Began subtly. Ava would get scolded more harshly for small mistakes, spilling juice, crying too loudly, or not finishing her food. Derek claimed he was teaching her discipline. Stephanie, already under his influence, did not object. Over time, Derek's discipline became punishment. He started locking Ava in her room for hours. Then, The food portions got smaller. She often went to bed hungry, crying into her blanket. When neighbors asked why Ava wasn't playing outside anymore, Stephanie always had a story ready. She's not feeling well, or we're spending more time indoors lately. Nobody questioned it. Then came the bruises. They were hidden, on her arms, her back, her thighs, never the face. Ava stopped attending preschool regularly. When she did go, she barely spoke. The teachers noticed, but with no visible injuries and no confirmed suspicions, nothing was reported. Derek was careful. He didn't let Ava out unless absolutely necessary, and Stephanie played her role as the exhausted mother trying to manage a difficult child. What made the abuse even more disturbing was the routine. It wasn't a single outburst or one tragic moment. It was consistent, controlled, and calculated. Derek seemed to take pride in breaking Ava's spirit. He removed her toys, stripped her room of color, and turned it into a cell. No pictures, no warmth, just a mattress on the floor and a small blanket. Ava's cries eventually faded into silence. She learned that any sound could bring more pain. Medical records later revealed signs of old fractures, ribs, a wrist, even a collarbone that had healed improperly. None of them had ever been treated. There were also signs of severe malnourishment. Ava, once a healthy toddler, had lost weight rapidly over the months. Her skin was pale, her hair brittle. She was slowly wasting away, invisible to the world around her. All the while, Stephanie stood by. Whether out of fear or manipulation, she allowed it to continue. She told herself that Derek was just strict, that things would get better. But they never did. And Ava, too young to understand why her world had turned so cruel, quietly accepted the pain. She no longer cried out loud. She had learned that no one was listening. 18 months passed like a slow, silent storm. The house on Willow Lane remained quiet from the outside, but within its walls, a child's life was being shattered piece by piece. Ava was fading, and no one was there to save her. The night of December 3rd began like many others in the Thompson household, quiet, cold, and filled with tension. The air inside the small house felt heavy, almost as if something unspeakable was about to happen. Ava, weak and frail after months of abuse, was barely able to keep her eyes open. Her small body had become too exhausted to react, and her spirit had long been broken. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Her skin was pale, her lips dry, and her eyes distant. She was no longer the lively child who once ran barefoot through the grass. She was now a shadow of herself, existing only in the background of a home that had never offered her safety. Derek had grown more impatient in recent weeks. Every small sound Ava made irritated him. That night, he claimed she had kept him awake with her soft whimpering. He stormed into her room just after midnight, and what followed would mark the final hours of Ava's life. Angry and unhinged, he dragged her from her bed and forced her into the cold, dark garage, a place she had come to fear. It had no heat, no light, and smelled of oil and dust. Derek left her there with no food, no blanket, and no way to call for help. The temperature outside had dropped to nearly freezing. Ava was wearing only thin pajamas. The concrete floor of the garage was like ice beneath her. With no energy left to cry, she sat curled up in a corner, her small frame shivering uncontrollably. Hours passed. No one came. Stephanie, who knew where her daughter was, remained silent in the bedroom, either too afraid to intervene or too far gone emotionally to care. By morning, Ava was gone, Her fragile body had finally given up. The combination of starvation, untreated injuries, and exposure to the cold had taken its toll. Instead of calling emergency services or seeking help, Derek made a horrifying decision. He viewed Ava not as a child, not as a human, but as a problem, to be erased. What he did next shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Around 4 a.m., Derek wrapped Ava's lifeless body in an old sheet and carried her to his truck. He drove nearly 15 miles to a secluded wooded area, known only to local hunters and hikers. It was dark, remote, and far from any main roads. He believed it was the perfect place to hide his crime. There, in a small clearing, he placed Ava's body beneath a pile of dry leaves and wood, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. The flames quickly consumed everything. But what Derek didn't realize was that a nearby wildlife trail camera, hidden in a tree just 50 yards away, had caught the glow of the fire and a partial image of his truck. A single mistake in an otherwise calculated cover-up would soon become his downfall. For now, though, Derek returned home, cleaned his clothes, and acted as though nothing had happened. Ava had vanished, but her story was far from over. 2 days after Ava's disappearance, pediatric clinic noticed her absence during a scheduled wellness check. It wasn't unusual for parents to miss appointments, but this one felt different. Ava had been a regular patient, and her absence raised concern due to past visits where signs of neglect were quietly noted. The nurse attempted to reach Stephanie, but her calls went unanswered. Something didn't feel right. Following protocol, the clinic filed a welfare report with Child Protective Services. When officers arrived at the Thompson home, they were met with unease. Stephanie appeared nervous, avoiding eye contact, her hands trembling as she opened the door. Derek, standing behind her, offered curt answers to every question. He claimed Ava had gone to stay with a relative for a few weeks. But when asked for names or contact information, neither could provide anything concrete. The story kept changing. First it was a cousin, then an aunt in another state. Officers grew suspicious. Inside the house, everything felt off. Ava's room looked untouched, but not in the way one would expect from a child recently sent away. The bedding was gone, the walls were bare, and her favorite stuffed animals were missing. A faint chemical smell lingered in the air. Officers asked to see the garage. At first, Derek refused, saying it was too messy and under renovation, but eventually they were allowed inside. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The garage was cold and mostly empty, but small traces of something darker remained. On the floor, near the far wall, were faint smears that looked like dried blood. Forensics would later confirm the presence of Ava's DNA. A discarded piece of clothing, believed to be one of Ava's pajama tops, was found in the corner, half burned. There were also signs that someone had attempted to clean the area recently. Bleach, stains, a mop still damp, and rubber gloves stuffed into a trash bag. Stephanie and Derek were taken in for questioning. Their stories fell apart within hours. Stephanie broke down first, admitting that Ava had died in the garage but insisting she wasn't present when it happened. She claimed Derek told her to stay in the bedroom, that he handled the discipline. She confessed to hearing Ava's cries, but said she was too afraid to act. Her silence, now exposed, became evidence. While investigators combed through their stories, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. A local hiker had reported a strange smell in the woods just outside Oak Ridge. Authorities searched the area and discovered charred remains in a clearing, bones, cloth fibers, and a few buttons from children's clothing. A trail camera nearby showed Derek's truck entering the area around 4 a.m. On the same morning, Ava disappeared. It was undeniable proof. DNA analysis confirmed the worst. The remains were Ava's. News of her death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. Parents cried. Teachers blamed themselves. Neighbors who had seen the signs but stayed quiet felt the weight of their silence. The truth had come out, but for Ava, it had come far too late. The courtroom was silent as prosecutors revealed the full scope of the horror Ava Thompson endured. Photographs of injuries, medical records, and disturbing evidence filled the room with a heavy, suffocating tension. Reporters lined the back wall, their eyes fixed on the accused. Stephanie sat frozen, pale and tearful. Derek, in contrast, showed little emotion. His expression was blank, as though the trial were just another inconvenience. The jury heard the timeline of Ava's final 18 months. Each incident, each injury, each moment of neglect. Experts testified about the extent of her suffering. Doctors described untreated fractures, signs of long-term starvation, and injuries that no child could sustain without screaming in agony. A forensic psychologist explained how a child like Ava likely lived in a constant state of fear and confusion, unsure if help would ever come. The cruelty wasn't impulsive, it was deliberate, systematic, and ongoing. Stephanie's defense attempted to portray her as a victim, manipulated and emotionally trapped by Derek. But the evidence painted a different picture. She had witnessed the abuse, heard the cries, and seen the bruises. She had choices, but chose silence. Her failure to act became one of the most haunting elements of the case. The prosecution argued that silence in this case was as dangerous as the violence itself. Derek's history came into sharp focus as well. Investigators uncovered a sealed juvenile record that hinted at violent behavior as early as age 13. Former partners described controlling behavior, bursts of rage, and threats that kept them in line. One woman even recalled how Derek would become enraged if a child cried for too long, calling it manipulative noise. Though none of his prior behavior had escalated to murder, it had clearly paved the way for what happened to Ava. Just when the trial seemed to reach its conclusion, a shocking twist came to light. During a second search of the Thompson home, investigators discovered a hidden compartment in the basement. Inside were small belongings, a toddler's toothbrush, a pair of tiny shoes, and a faded blanket that didn't match anything Ava owned. Forensic testing revealed DNA from another missing child, a 3-year-old girl named Lacey Fields, who vanished 2 years prior in a neighboring town. Her case had gone cold until now. The new discovery opened up the possibility that Ava wasn't Derek's first victim. Investigators launched a new inquiry, searching for connections between Derek and other unexplained disappearances. Suddenly, the courtroom wasn't just focused on Ava. It was looking at the possible trail of a predator. In the end, Derek was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Stephanie received 20 years for child endangerment and failure to protect. But for the town of Oak Ridge, no sentence could undo the loss. Ava's death ignited public outrage, prompting new child welfare policies and mandatory reporting laws. Her short life, filled with pain and silence, became a symbol, a reminder of what can happen when people look the other way.